Yeah. Right. With the example, just in time slide not agile. Sorry. Oh, thanks. Yeah, they're not. They didn't know where the camera is. That's the problem. Just sitting down. I can't get to use it. Oh, that's true. Okay, so when John said new slides, it means about 70.
No, I'm still. I was doing the pictures and Phil said, no, that's too heavy. And
Yeah, we're yeah, right. Well, I'm supposed to share about my therapy session. So I'll find the right one. Sorry.
I am so sorry.
Oh, it's
My
okay.
apologies.
No.
That's the only thing I forgot to reset.
Thanks. Yes, that's that one. That's my one. Balance in the universe has been restored. Yeah. We can at least let people know this is a meeting and we're going to start in just a few minutes. Yeah. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is the Supa working group session. If you're intending to join us, then please remain and find a seat. If you're not, could you take your conversation at least towards the back or even out of the room? And yes. And also, we're going to start just a few minutes late, considering it's lunchtime. We just wait for people to amble into the session. So we'll be starting in just a few minutes. I was beaten as a child. All manners. I'll just close the door and then maybe. Okay. Just move these. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Supa. So just a reminder that we have our IETF note well. So most of the veterans to the IETF would know the policies associated with participation at the IETF. But if you are a new member to the IETF, then welcome. Hope you're enjoying your week so far. But please pay attention to the note well. They are extremely important. So on our agenda today, we have some very important aspects of Supa to discuss in terms of the current status, what has worked so far. I think this will be our 5th meeting of Supa. So we've been working now for almost 2 years on the policy aspects. We need to sort of take an evaluation point at this stage and see what's been working and what's not working. We're then going to review the current working group documents, specifically our information model, data model, and framework. We're also going to recap the example that Joel and John provided to the working group in response to numerous requests of how we might apply Supa. And then we're also going to have a presentation from the applicability statement. Now, that's not actually a working group document. That is still an individual draft at this time. And then after the review of the documents, we're going to go back to the QA section of the working group session and really start asking some hard questions about current status of Supa and what's next for Supa. And in fact, is there a next for Supa? And then we have any other business at the end of the session. So are there any requests to the agenda or changes? Yeah, so we remember that the session is being recorded. We have already sent out, well, we've spoken to a couple of folks for minutes and Jabber. Do we have nods in the room for the Jabber scribes and the minute takers? And try and make eye contact with people. Yep. Great. So we've got minutes. Who's currently on Jabber? Okay, so we have Joel about to Will. Great. If you can just help us with Jabber. And if you're asking questions or you're one of the presenters, feel free to use Etherpad as well, just to kind of clarify the discussion that you're having at the microphone. That would be helpful, and we can consolidate that into the minutes after the working group. We can post those to the list. So let's jump straight into sort of the state of the Supa Nation. So we have a very clear charter in terms of what is it or what is the problem that Supa is attempting to solve. So We're trying to define the Yang data models to encode policy, which will point to device, technology, and service-specific Yang models developed in other working groups. So harmonization of policy, potentially across the IETF, where policy is required within other working groups. And this is not just limited potentially to the IETF. These models could be used by other external organizations, open source and standards organizations. How do we evaluate whether or not Supa is successful? We have a number of ways. Of course, we have our milestones, but we specifically had a statement in the charter that mentions the working group will have succeeded when the Supa policy constructs are reused in future IETF specifications. And again, as mentioned, ideally adoption or reuse across other standards organizations. Our milestones are fairly limited. We have the core data model itself, an information model, framework ID, and an applicability document. And as we've seen on the agenda already, these are already covered and they'll be discussed a little bit later in the session. This is the current status in terms of revision and size of each of those documents. So we've been thanks to a number of the key authors here, we've been issuing a variety of iterations of the document, or each of those documents. We had at the previous IETF session a request for better examples of how you might apply the Supa model, specifically in the context of something maybe that was already being developed within the IETF. So thank you very much, Joel, and again, John, for providing that to the list. I mean, there is a sort of caveat that statement with some disappointment, actually, that the discussion, well, the use case, the example here didn't help with the discussion on the list, at least. So that's unfortunate. A lot of work was put into how we could sort of use Supa, where we would apply particular clauses and what sort of event and condition action that would derive. So if we're kind of stepping back now and just trying to gauge the relative success of the working group, and one of the measurements that we would use or potentially use is whether or not the documents have a sufficient number of reviews to actually sort of be progressed towards last call. And right now, we have a distinct lack of reviews for both the information model and the data model. And really, we could say beyond the authors of the framework document, we haven't had a significant number of comments on the framework, but certainly with the framework, maybe it's already well discussed and a fairly mature architecture even before sort of Supa became a formal working group. There's been some comment that a couple of the documents have had infrequent updates, but we know that there has been discussion offline, not always posted on the list. And then that's generally sort of reflected in a large update to the relative document. And another measure or criteria for success is whether or not the work is being implemented, which is a very important component of IETF process. And we have sort of seen two specific vendors actively working on the documents and participating in the working group. We haven't seen any other vendor, at least sort of generally contributing to the work. We have had comments from other vendors. We had a presentation at the previous working group as well from another vendor, but that didn't progress into anything concrete in the working group that I'm aware of, anyway. So if we use the sort of the underlying goal of Supa, which was to reuse the constructs across other working groups and specific Yang models that require policy in other working groups within the IETF, then just last week we ran a grep to see how how many Yang models that require policy within the IETF actually import the Supa constructs, and currently that is 0. However, we are aware of a variety of efforts in progress where that number will increase. And maybe it's also worth mentioning that in the charter we have stated that if there's a work item that's already being progressed in another group, then they shouldn't hold up their work if it requires policy waiting for Supa. We certainly don't want to delay other working group activity as we continue to develop the Supa model. To help both our AD and the chairs understand whether or not Supa is being disseminated and what the level of interest is across other working groups of Supa, we created a survey. And if you click the link, you'll see the specific survey questions. We sent this out in two tranches. The first time we sent out the survey, I think, was Friday last week. We sent it to approximately 4 ID aliases where the Yang model specifically mentioned Supa, and we got 1 response back relatively quickly. And then we sent out another mail shot with the survey requesting that any Yang authors who are interested in policy, either directly within their document or maybe future work, it would be good if they could fill out the survey as well. So that only happened, I think, on Saturday. Yeah. So again, it's relatively recent. Now we're up to 4 responses. So we can hardly empirical evidence maybe at this stage, but certainly starting to get an idea in terms of who's actually been following the Supa work, and maybe whether or not they think it's relevant for their document, or simply their document is too mature to use the Supa model at this stage, or import parts of Supa at this stage. Out of those 4 responses, we did get a couple of responses saying that the current model was too complex, and this will actually enable us. It wasn't a blind survey. People were encouraged to kind of state their name and also provide links to their document. So we can follow up with the respondents that sort of have commented that maybe there's too much complexity with the model. So this is something that we can hopefully address after this particular working group session.
I'm sorry. This is Will from Huawei. So about the survey here, I don't remember I received such emails. So where is?
Okay. So do you have a Yang model with policy as part of the requirement of your Yang model in the IETF?
So you mean only those guys can receive this survey, or it's distributed to everyone?
Well, no, the survey is targeted at authors that have Yang models in the IETF, specifically starting with those document or those Yang models that use policy.
I am the author of several Yang documents, but those are not a working group document. It's just an internet draft.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't remember I received such emails, or it's blocked by my firewall or something.
So Benoit Clay speaking. We brainstormed multiple times with the chairs, and the last time was last week, on what we could do to see if there is interest. So what we did is that I extract from all the IETF drafts, all the Yang models. So I grabbed in there on the policy keyword to see if we had like Yang modules that contain the keyword policy. Out of that, we just looked up all the draft names and contacted all the authors. So it was not sent to a mailing list. It was just targeting the people who should be consumer of the work here.
We can post the survey on the Supa list as well, and folks can forward it on to people they think might also provide constructive or useful feedback.
Joel Halpern. I just want to comment that while Yang is our primary deliverable, we shouldn't ignore the fact that even the IM being used, and it is being used in a large number of places, is a valuable result. It means our work here matters. Now, I'm not saying I don't want to produce the Yang model, I do, but we shouldn't lose track of the fact that we can have impact in more ways than just by people adopting the Yang model.
Benoit Claes. So maybe, but I keep hearing that it's used, right? So the only evidence I could have is what I see with my tools, right? So let's not forget also that the charter we said, if the working group feels like it, he might be working on information model in order to derive a data model, right? So this is the metric I have. So otherwise I have to trust people telling me it's used or it's not used.
Yeah, and we are going to have, after we review the current status of the working group documents and the individual drafts, we are going to have a lot of time, a portion to sort of a QA, an open discussion on what the usefulness of the current work is within the IETF and within the industry. So we can certainly continue this discussion. I think just a couple more slides just on the survey. The survey has triggered additional discussion beyond actually that of whether or not the supermodels being imported within various IETF efforts. So we can kind of just push this, I think, towards the back end of the session as well, so we can get a better idea of where Supa is being used potentially outside the IETF, which is certainly one of the objectives of the working group as well. So let's move into the working group reviews of the different documents. So I think we need the first presenter. I think, John, that's going to be you, isn't it? The info model. Yeah, just check make sure it's on. Yeah.
So hello, everyone. I'm John Strassner, and I will talk about the information model and hint about the data model. Joel will do justice to the data model. This, if you noticed, I was sneaky, this says info model -03. That means that Joel and Sven and I are actually working on an update to the -02 model. And I did this because hopefully we all know what the current info model is, and the chairs had requested, well, what is the status and what are you doing? So sections 1 through 4, which is roughly 45 pages, only had minor wording changes and the ubiquitous grammatical error fixes. So they're stable. Section 5 is the generic policy information model. So this is the portion of the model that is the superstructure for any type of policy. So it defines 2 key concepts: a policy rule as a container and different elements that can go into that container. They could be events, conditions, and actions, or they could be other more complex things. In there, we have one kind of medium to major change, which is the decorator pattern, based on implementation experience from actually 2 vendors and a carrier and the MEF. We figured out a better way to do this, and Joel will talk about that. We've changed a couple of things, and this was actually due to the SNMP blocking example. So we added the concept of a policy role, And as you'll see in the blocking example, this allows us to say things like all interfaces that are peering with this AS, or all interfaces that have SNMP coming in to their ingress ports, and apply all edge interfaces. And well, it could be a core interface, but that wouldn't be so good, but I digress. And that had a change to the metadata portion of Supa, because a role is, of course, metadata. In section 6, which is the ECA policy model, again, the changes in the decorator pattern propagate to that. Well, actually, they just apply to the EPRM. They don't, there isn't additional work except in the Yang model. We've added one attribute and we've moved a couple attributes, and that's it. So, and then in section 7, there's not just the SNMP example, which was very detailed, probably 12 pages, I think, at about 5 figures, but we're also adding an ACL example, because ACLs, even though they're conceptually simple, are implemented multiple different ways in multiple different IDs. And so the ACL example has 2 parts. One, could we use a draft? And for better or worse, we picked the netmod ACL draft. And then, so the purpose of that example is to show, yes, we can take work that is current in the IETF and we can simply wrap Supa around it. That's a good thing. Then we said, if netmod didn't exist, which of course would be a bad thing, but let's just hypothesize, or if netmod existed and hadn't done the ACL draft, how could Supa do it? And that produces a slightly different result than the first. And then the third set of examples are from the applicability draft that Yang is leading. And we've taken those examples and mapped that to a more detailed form. Thanks for the good use cases there. For example, the so-called instant VPN, right? And we've shown how we can do that in Supa. So now the big question, so what does all this mean, right? Well, what it means is that there's one final significant change to the info model, and that's the decorator pattern. We had already previously implemented the changes from the SNMP blocking example. So we have that. Then the information model will be stable and ready for last call. And I hate giving dates, but if you insist, maybe a month from now. The data model, Joel can talk about, but the key thing from our point of view is that there's no new implementation hurdles left. We've already cut our teeth, right? We know how to get things to compile. We know how to make the Yang tools happy. We know how we've actually built patterns that take or transform the elements in the Supa model to Yang constructs. And if you look at the Yang module, you'll see those patterns are very evident. I mean, every particular container is constructed the same way. So there are no new implementation hurdles. We do need to change some things because of the decorator pattern. We need to add the ECA portion, and that's it. I can review the SNMP blocking example if you would like, or we could just put that one on hold and skip to Joel.
Who actually looked at the SNMP blocking example that was provided on the list? So just hands up. Okay. Is there anyone in the room who would be interested in going through the example? Okay. Yeah. But is there anyone in the room who hasn't had a chance to see the example and would like to see how Supa can be applied, for a specific use case for a particular application? No. Okay. So I think we can continue then.
Continue? Okay. Bing, bing, bing. Joel, unless there's any questions for me, I would give the mic to Joel. Oops.
Sorry, this is Will from Huawei. Actually, recently I got a clarifying question from my product controller product. They're asking about the routing policy. Actually, I don't think this is actually belong to Supa, but they are requesting me that, for example, whether Supa or, for example, R2RS should work on this and when they will be work on this, because they are really looking at to produce this model and to implement it in their product. So it's about routing.
You can go first. I'll go second if needed.
So the Supa policy model can be used to represent routing policies. Obviously, you have to create some subclasses of objects you're going to talk about if you're doing it event-based, routing-related events and routing-related actions that you want to apply, which are somewhat different than packet manipulation events and actions. But the structure is still the same. We should be very applicable. And I'd love to work with folks. As far as I know, the way Supa is chartered, we're not going to do that level of detailed work here, at least now. Now, if we get this stuff done and folks want to engage in how do we actually build detailed policies and what additional classes do we need for problem space X and problem space Y, Benoit will have to decide where we do it, but we can work on that.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, I think that we could be used in to implement the ideas that are going on in BESS or TEAS or I2RS or any number of other things. But as Joel said, we're focused on what we're doing now, but it's certainly possible. Any other questions?
I don't think there's any more slides that I'll take the pointer anyway.
Oh, yeah. The two.
Oh, I'll get to these two in a moment. So first I want to talk just a little bit about the data model, and then John talked about the issues with the decorator pattern, and I want to hammer a couple of points home on that. But first, on the data model, we're going to do the rest of the data model for the ECA information model. That's an easy transform. The only open question is, what do we do for enumerations? We have a bunch of enumerations in the data model. Last meeting, I brought up the fact that we could switch to use identities instead to get a little more extensibility. Nobody said anything. Unless somebody screams, I'm just going to change them to use identities. Because that seems to be the pattern I see in most of the Yang models for that sort of usage, in spite of the fact that Yang has an enumeration. So unless somebody screams, I'm going to make that change. Now, I don't see anybody going to the microphone to scream at me, so we'll go on to the next piece. While John and I were working with the MEF on usage of this stuff for policy and usage of similar patterns for core modeling of a bunch of things, we were looking at the decorator pattern we're using here and realized there were two different problems with the way it was written. One of them has to do with a detail in exactly how one talks about UML and how one understands UML. And one of the interesting things is it's very clear to me we don't have enough people reading this, because if you look at this diagram and you don't add special meaning to aggregation, that is an infinite regress. You have things that have to be decorated, that has to be attached to, wait a minute, what? And does everything have to be attached to an underlying clause? Well, yeah, but it didn't say so in the document. And we actually realized you didn't want it to be required to be attached. That was the easy problem. We then went and looked at the description of what decorator pattern here is supposed to do and realized, this doesn't actually have the substitution property you want, because the idea is that these decorators wrap around this thing and get substituted for them. So when you have a clause with some decorators, the outside sees something that it looks at as a composite structure, a component structure. And it doesn't have to worry about the details because the interfaces are the same, and it can fetch an attribute and it gets the right result from the wrapper. But that's not actually what the UML model did. So we had to tweak the model. It doesn't make a big difference, but it looks a bit different. So you still have the clause coming in and the external reference to the clause, because we wanted to be very clear that the policy structure references clauses. It doesn't reference arbitrary components, it references clauses. And then clauses aggregate these decoration components, which are all of these kinds of things, or arbitrary nesting decorations. And then we cleaned up the cardinality here so we don't get any strange regresses, and we can use freestanding things so you can reuse them if you need to, as a side effect of cleaning this up. And the result is this actually does what you want to do, because you can wrap these things up and use them as a nested way of saying, I have this that is made up of these, that is made up of these, and it does let you get the full versatility we were looking for in the model. But the fact that nobody asked us any questions, nobody said to me, or to John, or to the list, what does this actually mean? Tells me not enough people are reading it. We've cleaned it up. I think it means the right thing now. And we will fix the SNMP data model to reflect this. That's easy. The pattern we're using very nicely will produce this in the SNMP data model. We put the right must clauses and cardinalities in the right places, and it falls out for free.
So my observation is that this may be because the decorator pattern is very widely used. For example, the entire Java I/O library uses the decorator pattern. Pretty much any windowing toolkit uses the decorator pattern, blah, blah, blah. And all of those UML representations for the windowing toolkits, for Java, for any academic text look exactly like the first rendition that we had. When Joel and I passed it to our engineers to implement it, especially engineers that weren't familiar with Java or windowing toolkits, they went, wait a minute, this is ambiguous. And so one interpretation is people looked at it, looked at the existing documentation, said, oh, okay, we know what you mean. But Joel's point is critical. We want this to not have any surprises, right? And so the way that we built this now with the Supa policy clause specifically aggregating decorated components makes it impossible to have any ambiguity. And hence, it's also easier to translate into Yang and other data models.
Okay. Any other comments? Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Joel. Thanks, John. I believe, Will, we've got you next for your framework document.
Hi, everyone. This is Will from Huawei. So I'm the author of policy framework. Thank you. Okay, so this document was just updated to 0.1 version. So here is the history of this document. I omitted the old history, but only the new ones. This was adopted last year after Berlin meeting in August. And then we started to update this draft since last August. And actually, we planned to submit it in before Seoul meeting. However, the authors didn't get agreed with the new architecture, so we got a little bit delayed. So after that, we got the consensus on the new figure. Then we submitted before this meeting. So basically, we did the following update. So because the old document was written from Word, then we transferred it to XML, and we answered and addressed most of the comments from the mailing list and the offline discussions. And we updated actually two main architecture figures I will describe later. And we added an explanation to solve the misunderstanding issues. I know that policy for some people are not easy to understand, huh? And we almost clear all the typos, and we also added a new section about terminology. So the reason that we updated this at a late time, because as the charter said, we need to let other people to use Supa to make this working group success. So in last year, we start another project is to create a new ISG in SC to focus on the network intelligence, which can use Supa policy as a very key component. So after half a year's efforts, it was created in this February. So I have two backup slides in the later. If you are interested, you can check up in these slides where the introduction for SC ISG. Okay, so this is the first figure that we updated. Actually, after the 0 version posted, we got many comments on this figure, this figure about where we can use Supa policy and where should the Supa policy applied, and whether we should split the design time and running time, and how is the information model and data model, the relationship, and the relationship with those controllers, orchestrators, blah, blah. So after a long discussion, we finally updated this figure into the one on your right hand. So in this figure, we added a C arrow from the GPDM and the EPDM to the controllers. So here, and we split this into the design time and the running time. And we also show the cases in the charter. Actually, in the charter, from the very beginning, we designed this team is that the policy work can be used the OSS, BS, orchestrator, EMS, NMS, and the controller and the network element. So here we draw all of them here so that Supa policy can be used with them. And also we changed the sentence explaining the D arrow. So that's the main updates. And after we posted this, actually before we submit the new version, we posted this draft on the, we posted this figure on the mailing list, and this was got agreed by, I remember by at least Diego from Telefonica agreed with this figure. And I also got some other agreement from the offline emails. And for the second one, actually, this is the third. I was just talking about your agreement with the figure. So here, this is about the third figure in our draft. Actually, I added this figure when we have the 0 version to explain the relationship and how to use policy to deal with service as well as resources. Actually, at the very beginning, many people are confused and ask questions on millions about what's the relationship. So later we draw this like a triangle figure, but the lines are different actually. So here we have the policy to the resource and policy to the service. So these two lines means that the policy can manage and can adjust the service or resources behavior as necessary. And please note that one policy can or may adjust one to more than one resource or services. So it's like a one to n relationship. And for the third line, actually, this is the line we added here. So this line is different from the first one and second one. It means that the resource hosts the service, and the changing resource may change service behavior necessarily. So here are some details that I will not read here. And so very many thanks to many reviewers' comments received, and we already addressed them here. So the figure was updated actually, and we dealt with the structure issue and explanation issue and typos, and also we updated the reference. For the open question last time, when we were discussing in Seoul about the consensus on the figure 2 is already closed and got rough consensus now, and so we submitted the new version. So the next step is to ask for more reviewers, especially for those implementers and who are willing to use this one to give us comments, and then we will submit a stable version. And here are some summaries on the mailing list that because the chairs were asking who are using Supa, so I did a page to summarize the status. So within the IETF, we will have several policy-based modules in R2NSF that John is working now. And we would like to see others. For example, SFC might be another position who might use Supa policy. And outside the IETF, for example, MEF will be reducing and adding to Supa in its policy-driven orchestration efforts. This is also John is leading. And also we have a new ISG, ENI. The full name is Experiential Network Intelligence, who will be focusing on the network intelligence. We're reviewing Supa policy as a fundamental key there. And there will be several H2020 programs that are reviewing Supa. So this is the usage inside IETF and outside IETF. Thank you.
Benoit Claes. So one clarification question. What do you mean by reusing Supa?
Reusing or just the use Supa. Reusing. Because I can understand, I can answer it like, because we have information model. And the information model, you can generate the data model accordingly, right? So for the other SDOs or working groups, they can generate their data model according to our information model. So that I use the term reuse. I'm not sure whether it's the correct term.
So we have information model. They're using the concept of information model in their data models.
I'm sorry, this sentence is a little...
Yeah, right. So let me repeat the question for you, and then you can answer if you want.
Okay,
right?
okay.
So I'm wondering, so if they're using the information model concepts in order to create their own data models in Yang.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, if you want to answer. Or
Yeah. I think I'm short. Well, I think we'll talk about this more in the later things, but what Will means is that there's actually two ways to apply Supa. So one is you could take the information model and add new constructs that don't exist in Supa. The second is you take all of Supa, including the data model, and then you extend it as well. So in the MEF, I'm leading that effort. I'm the orchestration area director. We're doing primarily the second. So we're extending a little bit of the information model. We're taking the Yang as is, and as we extend the information model, we're then adding to those Yang modules new Yang, new Yang modules. In ETSI ENI, we will potentially be making additional changes at the information model that would then again filter those down to the data model. In both, the focus is to produce Yang modules.
So thank you for that. So again, a clarification question then. So for MEF, so you mentioned you augmenting information model to create the MEF data models, which means that you're not using the data model in this working group.
Oh, no, not quite. Let me go and then Joel can go. So the info model here has X classes that do a particular set of things. So in the MEF, we're adding to that superstructure. So it's now X plus Y classes. We're taking the patterns that we've developed in the data model draft and applying it to those Y classes. So there's no new transforms, at least yet, right? And now you have X plus Y Yang modules.
So to be a little more concrete, the MEF work requires declarative policy. But we're going to use the information model from here, from Supa, the structures, and when we go to build the Yang models, we will use the Yang data model from this work and import that and add the declarative policies as subclasses so that we're building from the work. We do not want to create a different Yang model that would blow up the interoperability that we're after.
Sorry for not being clearer.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying.
I'm Xie Chongfeng of China Telecom. I have 2 points about Supa. The first one is that I think Supa can be used in multiple network functions of the network, including both the controller and the network orchestrator based on our experience. And the second point is that I think the relationship you have mentioned, relationship between policy and the resource is very meaningful. And we are considering to do some network about resource management. I think that the policies such as EC policy model will be very helpful for the resource management, improve resource utilization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Developers, just because of the illusion of the H2020 programs, which are not programs, are projects. H2020 is a program only, and that is several projects. No, just to try to explain a little bit what we are doing there. We are taking part in a project that is dealing with application of cognitive methods to network management. And then you have to define and to exchange between the elements that are deriving the policies and the elements that are applying the policies. You have to exchange the policies. And precisely the idea was to use Supa for that. And we are using it as well. And maybe it's not, I'm not sure if it's a degenerate case, and Joel and John will be jump at me like you are committing was a horrible crime. But they're using it the same say we had to deal with the streams, several streams of generic events. We are trying to model the events using Supa. I mean, it's not only the event, not the condition, not the action, just events. So we can encapsulate any kind of event, whatever the kind is. So at least in this particular project, and we are discussing about applying this in another scenario, which is, well, it's I2NSF, it's derived from I2NSF, but it's precisely about distributed security.
Benoit Claes again. So one clarification question. So actually it's the same one for 3 meetings now. So let me do this really fast. So I2NSF. So 2 meetings ago, they came and said, okay, we're going to use Supa. We had some question on actually, what are you using, IM or DM? Then Georgios won like the last meeting, and we asked the same questions. Now, I was hoping, because I saw I2NSF in the hackathon, I was hoping that they would actually implement something, and that would be like based on the Yang model, for example. So I'm not sure if you were involved in the I2NSF hackathon, or if you have more information on what they've been doing exactly in terms of policy, and if there is something related to Supa. If someone knows, I don't want to put you on the spot, right?
Not
But
at the hackathon.
Right, right. Well, it was Sue and actually slash. So. Okay. Well, besides the important reuse of T-shirts, the answer is, as far as I know, as follows. So they built a Yang data module, sorry, partially from the existing Supa data module, partially from their own work, because in I2NSF, we're using Supa as the superstructure and then refining that to represent security policies, security events, security metadata, right? Well, and some other things, but you get the idea. And so that leads, the way they did it is not the way that Joel and I are doing it in the MEF. They wrote a new Yang module. I would have preferred that they had multiple Yang modules and, you know, do it normally. But this is, I think, is the first. I think this is, they had a bunch of grad students, and I think this is the first Yang they've ever written. So that's as best as I know. I can easily find out and report on the list. But they are reusing it.
Okay, thanks, John. Thank you, Will. We're going to go straight into the applicability document. And just while our speaker's coming up, the room's actually been expanding. So if you haven't signed the blue sheet yet, please make sure you sign the blue sheet before the end of the session.
Just an answer to Benoit. Actually, what I'm not sure if I mentioned that about the hackathon, but it should be on. Okay.
With the permissions of the chairs before. No, just I was checking with Paul Jeong, who was reporting, and in the slides they are mentioning directly the I2NSF data models implemented in Yang. So my impression is that they are using, I mean, I2NSF, that is coming from Supa. Then they are making some, my impression is that they're making some funny translations into OpenFlow, OpenFlow rules. But well, that's part of the implementation details.
Yeah, and actually Sue mentioned that during the previous meeting about the hackathon.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ying Cheng from China Unicom. So I will present the applicability of a Supa draft. You can find, based upon the link provided on this slide, you can find the latest draft applicability of a Supa. It explores some typical use cases and demonstrates the applicability of a Supa policy models. The latest version is version 1. And you can find on the right, it is the table of content based upon the comments and the progress of other ongoing work, draft in this working group. We have make some updates. For example, some of framework text and figures, making alignment with the framework draft, and update some use cases. You can find in the table of content. Let me introduce them one by one. This slide introduced the summary of progress. You can find it for version 00 as of August 5 last year. We present all the use cases collected in Supa working group creation and with the corresponding ECA description for each use case, including switched Ethernet service, VPC, traffic manipulation across data centers, virtual SP, instant VPN traffic optimization, and queues assurance on ISP. Based on the discussion during IETF 97 in so we trained the existing use cases based on the agreement in order to reflect the typical requirements of operators. The remaining use cases include the VPC and instant VPN. And as John discussion and presentation just now, we added the use case of SNMP blocking provided via email, and some colleagues have read it. So let me introduce it very briefly in next slide. In this slide, you can find the SNMP blocking use case provided by John. You can find we just summarized the target and summarized the real-world scenario into two typical use cases. Our target is to block inbound and outbound SMP traffic. And the first use case, first case is if any network element has a port that meets the criteria of the row edge interface, and it is inside the enterprise domain, the block is SNMP traffic. We summarize the ECA policy. The intent is to is that SNMP traffic is sent or received. The condition, if it is this port implements the edge interface row, and if this port is in the enterprise domain, the corresponding action is to block SNMP traffic. We also have the corresponding second case. If a network element is added with the enterprise domain, if any of its ports take on the row edge interface, we need to add a filter to block SMP traffic for that port. You can also find the corresponding ECA policy summarized in this slide. So let's come to the next use case. It is virtualized private cloud. It is original use case based upon the old version of Supa applicability draft. A public cloud operator can virtualize the cloud resources into multiple isolated VPCs and provide them to different tenants. After the virtual machine is moved to the new DC, the network related to the virtual machine must be updated accordingly. So we summarize the target is to perform VM migration when user location changed and the network load between these two data centers is very low. And then we summarize the ECA policy. You can find it in this slide. The intent is a VPC user's location is changed near to another DC, and the condition is the network load between these two DC, the old DC and the new DC, is less than the threshold. And then the corresponding action, we have two steps. The first one is to migrate the VM to the new data center, and then the second step is to update the VPN connecting the user's service. So let's come to the last one, instant creation VPN. The description is CE should send authentication request to the PE, and the PE should forward the request to the management system together with port frame slot ID on which the request is received. So we summarize the target is to configure VPN for an enterprise customer to connect its enterprise network with VPC. And the summarized ECA policy also presented in this slide. The intent is to service management system receives a CE request for VPN creation forwarded by PE. And the condition is authentication and authorization resource are okay. And then the corresponding action is to configure a VPN based on received request, including the user's grade and physical info, including the port, slot, frame, route ID, etc. So that's the basic introduction for the framework and the use cases. So let's come to the next step. I think we need to make alignment with the mature information model and the data model presented by Joe and John, and then give the updated version for this draft. So in order to take, I'd like to take this opportunity to request the adoption of this document as a working group draft at this stage. So that's all my presentation. Thank you for listening to me.
So are there any questions on that?
This is Will from Huawei. So actually, I read this draft and I really like actually I appreciate the new case from SNMP actually. My team is actually working on a demo to implement this this function. I mean this SNMP blocking policy into our controller. Mm-hmm. So we are looking for, I mean, more details and also the data models for that, so that we can use it in our demonstration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So there were two things on the slides a moment ago. One was the comment that you need the information model and data model a little more stable. And then the second one was the request to adopt it as a working group draft. So let's take the working group draft question first. Can I have a hum, please, on people who agree that that's a good idea? Who would like to see the working group adopt this draft? Funniest time I've seen for a long time. But there's about 6 or 7 people with hands up. So and that's about 1/3 of the people in the room.
Just a comment, I think this is interesting to have a set of applicability samples or examples or whatever we call them, though I think that we would need a little bit more. I mean, and probably it's about interacting with I2NSF or interacting with other people that are applying this. It would be interesting. Because, I mean, my only concern here is I have gone through the draft very superficially, not in detail, but my very concern here is that it's very much focused on particular, how to say, private network or private network protection, and probably will be interesting to consider other environments, like in the case of general network management. But I mean, this is something that is a mea culpa as well, because it's something that I could bring some, I guess, from the yeah. Don't say yes. Say yes. It's your fault.
Yeah, absolutely. It is your fault, Diego. We haven't heard from you enough since the start of the working group sessions. So.
Yeah, no, but this is true. I think the work is valuable, and there is I see an interest in having a document like this as a reference. That would be essential, because among other things, Supa is something that from time to time is difficult to understand why it's for, and this is something that is precisely the basic thing here. John knows that when we started thinking about dealing with this incognito in this project I was mentioning before, well, he had to spend some time talking with Robert and others, just to try to make them see what we were doing. And well, this would have been save time.
Laurent Chavalia. I read the draft. I like the fact that you try to have examples and use cases in this draft. My comment is more that what exactly are you trying to show? Because I mean, triggering creation of VPN based on policy is not new things. So my comment or my suggestion will be try to show what the Supa models or the Supa approach is making a difference in this scope, because policy-based management, we have this for a long time. So what would be the added value of doing this with the Supa way with respect to what's existing today? This will show at least a delta from the current situation. Because otherwise it's just another model, another policy model.
So So let's summarize your comments. Is it your comments to make a clear and a close linkage with the information model and data model with this draft?
No, it's not that. It's the fact that okay, Supa is a new work in the space of policy-based management. But then you show examples of existing services. Okay.
Yeah.
What is the added value in terms of performance or functionality, whatever, that you have by doing it with the Supa way of modeling things?
So how to reflect Supa work in this presented service, right?
Sorry?
So is it your question to how to reflect Supa work in this use cases?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, just as an example, if we take your same examples and we do it with another policy model, okay, we can achieve the same thing. What is the value of or the difference of making it in a Supa way of doing things?
Yeah.
And I think this will bring value to, additional value to the draft, that we show clearly this is what Supa is providing as a difference with respect to state of the art.
So I think your comment is very valuable. We need to prepare some further work on this. Okay, thank you.
Georgios Kajansky, yeah, I also agree. I think it's good to emphasize that clearly in the document.
Okay, so clearly the working group does have a strong interest in this, but there's enough request for more detail, a little more work on the document. So we'll leave it for now, take it to the list, try to get some real discussion of it going on the list to help you along, and we'll look at it again at the next opportunity. Thank you. Right.
So this was sort of the final part of our session today, and it's kind of looking at the hard questions that we need to be asking ourselves. And we could sort of underpin, this discussion with the fact that there is an acceptance that policy is hard, and it's not. I use a sort of a particular example at the bottom of the page there, but there's an expectation that actually what looks like to be a fairly sort of simple aspect turns out to be incredibly complex and very, very deep. And even sort of coming up with a common definition on how to interpret policy, it seems, is open to sort of wild and various ideas within the IETF and also externally across different SDOs. But our boss, Benoit, has asked us to sort of have this discussion, this very sort of clinical discussion, which needs to look at a number of outcomes. And one of the outcomes that we might come to today is it's time to shut down the Supa working group. But before we kind of get to that particular question, let's start by recapping what we've achieved so far. So as I mentioned at the start of the session, we're coming up to it will be our fifth IETF that we've met at, and we now have a number of working group documents, and we're on target to completing all of at least the submission of the working group documents, the keyword working group documents. It sounded like by the middle of the year for working group last call. So Joel and John, it's the second time we've heard that date now. So you mentioned that you'll be able to stabilize your document and we'll be able to move forward in the next. Well, you mentioned a month, but I'm going to use the mythical man month principle and say it's a minimum of 2 months from a software engineering perspective.
Yep. So Joel and I were conferring, we were talking. Sorry, brain fart. And yeah, I mean, in principle, the IM could be done fairly quickly. I think after the SNMP blocking example experience where we went, oops, we need some more classes, we'd like to implement a couple more examples that are currently being written up. So I think it would be safe to say that we could go to last call with the next revision well before prod. So maybe 2 months, not 1 month. And then the DM, if we're lucky, same thing, or right after prod. Last call, I mean. Sorry.
Last call. So, as part of that preparation, and I'm not sure how feasible this is, but one of the sort of the constructive comments that we've had from the survey is that there's a sort of lot of complexity, with the model, and we're now seeing the model sort of being applied, and we can see how we use it. Is there kind of further pruning that we can do to the document just to make it a bit more soluble for folks who need to consume it in order to fully understand it?
So almost certainly. I did an experiment with the draft that I co-authored with Diego and Frank Shaw and Cataldo. Is it Basile or Basile? Right. In I2NSF. And this was like an 80 or 90 page Word draft that we then ASCIIified, right? Making up English as we go along. And we experimented with an approach where we kept the figures introducing the concepts in the main body of the draft, and kept the overall description, but then we moved the actual class models and attribute descriptions to appendices. So for this particular module, Appendix A, this other module, Appendix B, this other module, Appendix C. And that made the draft, the proper draft, we moved 50 pages. So out of a 70-page draft, you can now go very quickly through it, get an idea of what it is, what it means, and then for those that want more detail, they can go to the appendices. We could, in principle, do the same thing to the Supa draft. The Supa draft is, of course, more complex. It weighs in at 120 pages without the examples. The alternative that Joel and I were discussing is, what if we created a separate document that's just a Supa tutorial? And here's the main concepts. We could probably move most of section 4 into that document, so there's not a lot of rewriting there. But rather than have these detailed class and object and relationship specifications, which you need if you're going to be serious and implement them, we could instead say, here's a couple examples, here's how you use it, here's what it's good for, thank you very much. Target, typical IETF 30-page draft, references to the appropriate Supa IM and DM sections. That might be easier, right? Because when other organizations or operators have contacted me, and Joel, I think this is true for you too, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. The usual question is, okay, this draft is huge, but I'm really interested in it, and where do I start? And I say, well, what's your problem? And they say, well, I want to do this policy for this thing. Okay, read here, read here, read here, and then they go, great.
This is our Supa cookbook.
Yes, it's kind of Supa 101,
Yeah.
right?
Okay,
And
that sounds good.
I would love, and Joel seems to be agreeing with me, so we would love feedback from the room. Would this be a useful exercise or not? If it isn't useful, I don't want to embark on it.
I mean, at the moment, it's a couple of circumstantial comments that the document is very large and it's very complex, and some of the authors of other documents from other working groups that are using Yang and have a policy component just felt it's a steep ladder to climb.
Will Liu. So actually, I have a suggestion is that by learning from other very long draft containing data models such as L3SM and other document, I think a good choice will be that you make a very detailed table of contents. For example, in L3SM, they have several separated sections and subsections to make it very detailed. If authors want to check something, they can go directly into the related sections. But for the existing document, we can see that the table of contents is very brief, meaning that one section might contain too much contents. So maybe you can make some subsections so that make it more easy for people to find what they need. So that's just a suggestion.
Okay, thanks. Good suggestion. Benoit, are you getting up? I was just going to carry on through the list. So assuming that positive thinking here, we've got the document stabilized, update it based on which other method that we want to sort of have this cookbook, or we just keep everything in the current document now. If we move the document into law school, do we actually have the necessary number of people to do a thorough review during the law school comments, because during the law school period? Because it doesn't seem like on the list we're getting enough people to review these documents. Yeah, so it's not group consensus by default here. If we last call the document and no one reviews it, we wouldn't be able to sort of move that forward.
Show of hands. Okay, so if you're prepared to review these drafts, let's see a show of hands, please. I can count 1, 2. No, the authors can't review.
Let's be specific about the draft.
Okay, well, we'll take the information model draft first. Well, there's 1, 2, 3. Okay, well, that's barely enough, but that'll be a start. Okay, and the data model? 3, 4. Okay, so we've got a minimal core of reviewers. We'll have to make that decision a little closer to when it's ready, but that's a good indication. Okay. Benoit.
Benoit. So, whenever we have to take a decision, I always put like a list of pros and cons. We've been having this discussion multiple times, including with the chairs, and I like to thank you for trying to be proactive. We've been trying to be proactive, right? We've been trying to say, open daylight, we have this for you, interested? Well, the answer was, yeah, no thanks. So I have to observe a few things here. It's only a small set of people involved. Actually, it's we don't have enough people, right? The reviewers, the hands that were raised are, again, the same, the author of the other documents. It's a very small circle. So if I look at the list of pros and cons, so small number of people, not many interaction during the meetings, right? The energy is not very high. We have like 2 vendors interested. I don't see, a few operators potentially interested. I don't see the reuse of the data model, right? People are telling me, okay, we reuse information model, or we could reuse, or IETF might be reusing. So I'm not sure it is concrete here, because I've been hearing that for many meetings already. I looked at the milestones. We're about a year late, while the way it was sold to me as a work item is, it's an experiment. We want to try to have policy constructs that are reused. And I don't see them being reused, right? So I was hoping a lot from the I2SF hackathon this time. They came for multiple times. Well, to be checked. Something that makes me sad is the data model is not even updated since the last meeting, right? So what should I conclude here? So what else? The thing is that we've been trying on my list of cons, right, to close it. We've been trying to be proactive. We send email to the mailing list. We set, the cookbook, it's not new. We've been mentioning that for how many meetings, that we have to tell the potential users of this Supa policy, this is what you will get for free. This is what the free lunch is, right? When I spoke with people informally about Supa, well, too complex, I don't need that. And the simple policy. So obviously, we know that after phase 2, right, it will be a longer policy. But the first thing they need is something very simple. So, I mean, that's the fact. That's what people are telling me. Now, the L3SM, we said, okay, can you just go to L3SM and just say, if you would start day 1 with our model, this is what you would have. And maybe it looks way better than what you have. We mentioned that multiple times, right? Did not happen. So on the reason not to close the working group, we've got interest and implementation, I've been told, from 2 vendors. So on the question mark, so while brainstorming with you, chairs, this is the question from Will. I went through all my Yang models, grabbed on policy, we sent the email to all the different authors, and the feedback is not like very positive. Okay, maybe we want to wait a bit more, right? Because we might have some more answers. So maybe there is something with MEF, with Etsy, right? But every single time it's like, they could reuse this. It's like one of the last comments from Laurent on the applicability, right? Policy has been there for years, right? So what is the value of this Supa policy? So, what should we do now? Is it time to just say, okay, the window of opportunity is gone for data models to be reusing Supa? If I look at the schedule now, we speak about a last call before Singapore. So it's like 3 years, while the milestone was 1 year. We're 2 years late, 1 year late, I don't recall. But the point is that will it be used? Should we make the hard decision to say, stop? What is the likelihood it will be successful and used? So I have a big salary paid by the IETF. Now that's a joke. To take hard decision. Let me propose this. If you don't have substantive feedback on the draft a month before the next IETF, and by substantive, I don't need a +1, +1, +1, right? Substantive is like, I review this, I try to apply it, it doesn't work because. So, people who've been putting their hands in the oil, right? If we don't have that a month before the next IETF, we should shut down. And I think on the information model and the data model. Any reaction to that?
Thank you, Benoit, for the comments. I have 2 clarifying questions. One is that what is the way of your questions to those authors of the young data models? Because sometimes, because your survey, the way of doing survey may influence the answers. For example, if people don't reply, if they miss the email, then they will not reply it. Then you record that these people are not interested. Actually, sometimes we are too busy to receive emails, so that's the.
That's a fair statement. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe it's normal that the AD has to go and ask all the different people in the IETF whether they care about your working group? Or maybe you guys should have reached out and asked the world in the IETF, this is what I have for you. Are you interested? You understand what I mean?
Yeah, I understand what you're.
Because if you do your own survey, you ask the question you want. And people should have done that for 3 meetings already. If this was my baby, I would go to all working groups, speak to all people and say, this is how I model your stuff, this is the free lunch.
Excuse me, Benoit, we specifically in the charter said we don't expect people to start using the model, the data model, until we have the stability. Therefore, we couldn't spend the last 3 meetings going and asking people to use it because it wasn't ready. That's what the charter said. That's what you agreed to. So you're complaining about us not doing a survey that we said we wouldn't do because it would ask the wrong question. Seems rather unfair.
Point taken, unfair. My point is that why you guys haven't you gone to all the working groups telling this is how I would have the policy for you. I don't ask you to do a survey, right? I ask you to go to your own customers, which are the people in the IETF, telling I'm working on something for you. I have not seen that. We requested that multiple times. And it's not about the survey. It's not about blocking the young models, the ones that are being worked on. This is, you work on L3SM, we have Supa. Let me go through the exercise to have your L3SM policy with Supa, and this is what I came up with.
Maybe I thought L3SM was a service model. I didn't even realize it was doing policy. I don't read minds. I have been doing work with all sorts of people who are doing policy. They don't happen to be here at the IETF, but they're using our stuff, and they want to use Supa.
You should have grabbed the policy in all the young models. I mean, I've been trying to help you guys.
It's George Karadzianski. I don't know. I think it, yeah, you try to, you were very helpful, I think. But just in a compromise, is it possible to have this decision not say during the next IETF meeting, but the IETF meeting in the meeting after that? So we should not have a meeting, say if we don't have enough feedback or enough contributions. I hope that we will have it, but if we don't have a, say, face-to-face meeting in Prague, and then have the decision during the other meeting, the next in Singapore.
We do.
What are you trying to buy with that? I mean, if you're not meeting, you still want to have a decision after the IETF?
Yeah, well, to have, say, time to finalize to come to the working group last call also for the data model. And then during that period, also get comments that are needed.
You know, what's the message here? The message is move and get it done, right?
Yes.
And it seems that the chairs and I were trying to advertise what you're doing here. It's the wrong way of working. How come a data model is not updated since the last meeting? How come?
There were some obstacles. I think
Sure, fine. I mean, how come that whenever we ask about should I use an ENM identity, there are no show of hands? What should I conclude? How come that whenever we ask for reviews, I have the author of the other documents who want to be reviewers of, you know, so it's a small club.
Okay.
How come? I mean, it's up to me to find reviewers for you.
No, but we'll work on this. So this is already John, I think, mentioned there are some obstacles in that area, but we hope to, you know, by having
there are obstacles. There are always obstacles. The point is, what is the likelihood that is going to be good outcome and reused? And right now it's a curve which goes like.
Okay, so at this point we're way over time. It seems to me that Benoit's suggestion of seeing whether or not we can demonstrate some actual real discussion on the list and real progress before the Prague meeting is a reasonable compromise at this point. However, one last person at the mic.
I'm Chen Li from China Telecom. And we proposed CASM both. And I think the policy of Supa will be very helpful to the CASM system. And the CASM is to do the address management of several devices and in different scenarios. And I'm glad to see the output of Supa about policy to work with the CASM system. And I will be glad to work with the Supa and the CASM system. Thank you.
Okay. So that, well, I think we've done as much as we can this time around. Sorry to keep you away from your coffee. Thank you for turning up. And if you haven't signed the blue sheets, please do.
Could you hand? Okay, great, thanks.